Hey, can you believe that football season is here? I mean, it's crazy, right? Like we say this all the time. Can you believe such and such is here, or that Christmas is here, or the fall's here, or that it's already summertime? We say that every year. It seems like it's like we can't believe that the year just goes by faster. But man, the beginning or later this week, college football season kicks off. Next weekend, the NFL kicks off. It's crazy. It's a stretch run for baseball, and as you can see, I'm kind of in my man cave, my basement of my house where I've got my OU wall behind me. But what I love about this time of the year is we really begin to identify with the teams we root for. Like I'm a Cardinals fan, I'm a Chiefs fan, and we say this, but college sports for me are a little different, and I think for a lot of you. I grew up in Oklahoma, and as our fight song says, I am not just a Sooner fan, I am a Sooner born and a Sooner bred, and when I die, I'll be a Sooner dead. Now, maybe you relate that way, and you're that way with the Jayhawks or with K-State, or maybe a Cornhusker or some other college team that we identify with. And as a Sooner, as somebody who's from Oklahoma, who went to OU, man, I wear that with pride. And I might even label myself a Sooner more than I label myself anything else, with like one exception. And that one exception I read about, and I label myself as such because it means so much to me. We've been doing this Devo series on books of the New Testament. I chose the Gospel of John. And the reason I chose John, I think it might be my favorite, or at least one of my two or three favorites in the entire Bible, because it's so simple, but yet it's also so deep. The Gospel of John was described as a wading pool that a child could wade in, but that you could also dive and never find the bottom of. That's how it is. It's both deep and shallow at the same time. It's shallow in its simplistic language. It's easy to read. It's easy to understand, but yet you can dive and dive and dive on this. I think the reason I love the Gospel of John so much is because it just tells us point blank who Jesus is and why it matters. Who he is and what it means to us and why we should believe in him. In fact, that word believe, we read it in the Greek word, or in the Greek language, it's the word pisteuo, is found 98 times in the Gospel of John. 98 times. It's only 21 chapters long. If you take a class on interpretation, the number one rule they will tell you is if you see repetition, pay attention to that. If you see the same thing or the same theme over and over, pay attention to that. And we read believe. In fact, I've gone through my Bible, and in green, every time I see where pisteuo was translated, whether it's believe or a word similar to believe in my Bible or in the English translations, I've highlighted it in green. And I like it because it's the very similar word to the Greek word that's translated for faith. But believe is the verb form. Faith is the noun form. Believe is the verb form. It's putting your faith into action. I love John because it just starts right off telling us who Jesus is and why that's so important. It says this in verse 1 of chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The word, which is funny to say, the word, it's the Greek word logos. And it's not just word, but it's like a living, breathing word. And it tells us that he was with God in the very beginning. You go clear back to Genesis chapter 1, and one of the very first few words in the Bible, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, John tells us right here that Jesus was there with him. And in fact, if you go back to Genesis 1 and you continue to read it, you're going to find some interesting pronouns. You'll find plural possessive pronouns. Like Genesis 1:26, it says, let us make man in our image. It's not just God. Jesus is there with him. And he tells us that in John chapter 1, verse 3. All things were made through him. And without him, nothing was made. I love that. Jesus was there in the very beginning with God in creation, helping lead everything moving forward. And that's important for us. That's important for us because as John 1 continues on, it tells us more and more about who Jesus is. It tells us more and more about what it means to us in our walk with him today, all these thousands of years later. Like verse 5, it says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. You ever think about that? No matter how dark things are around you, no matter how dire things are around you, Jesus, the light of life, is in you, and the darkness can't overcome it. You ever tried to take a room that's dark and you like light a match or light a lighter or just turn on a little, maybe the light on the back of your phone? The darkness can't defeat that. The only way that the light loses is if the light itself goes out. Darkness itself can never overcome light. But I mentioned earlier, as I started this video, about how it's easy for us to identify. And I said there's one thing that I will always identify more than anything else, more than anything, more than being a Sooner, more than being a husband or a son or a father or a brother or a pastor or any nationality or state identity. There's one thing I'll always identify with. And I identify with it because God has allowed me to through Jesus. Like look on down in verse 12 of chapter 1. It says, "But to all who did receive him," talking about Jesus, "all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." He gave us the right to be called his children. And that's why we can pray to him, Father. Like in the Lord's Prayer, we start that prayer off by saying, "Our Father in heaven." That is such a special moment to understand that we can be called, no matter what your life has led to this point, no matter what junk or baggage is there, or what the world has tried to label you as, you have the right to be called his child, his son, his daughter. And it also tells us throughout the scriptures that we're called his friend. Jesus came to earth. It tells us that in verse 14, that he became flesh. The Word became flesh and he dwelt among us. He came and he pitched his tent with us. He came to us so we could come to him. And that's what the Gospel of John is all about. As you read it, you find John is fascinated with the number 7. 7 was the kind of number of perfection in the Hebrew world. And we see sevens over and over in John. And in fact, here in a couple of weeks, we're starting a new preaching series on the 7 miracles out of the Gospel of John. Brad and I will walk through that starting the week after Labor Day. So come check that series out. But we're going to talk about 7 miracles that Jesus performs in the Gospel of John that still matter to us today. Miracles like turning water into wine, or walking on water, or healing the nobleman's son, the feeding of the 5,000, all these miraculous things that Jesus does. But he also has 7 statements that we call the I am statements, where Jesus makes a declaration about himself, basically telling the readers and whoever was there that he is the fulfillment of everything you could have ever hoped for and everything you could have ever needed. I want to challenge you this week to read through the Gospel of John. 21 chapters. It's not a short book. It's a gospel. But John's a different gospel than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It takes a little different angle. And what we tend to see, in fact, 91% of John is unique to John. You don't find it in the other gospels. But what you will find in his gospel is why you should believe in Jesus, because of who Jesus is. So I want to challenge you this week. Dive into John, read it. Get through it, read it over and over.